Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the October edition of Michigan Farm Bureau's Hitching Post. Tonight's topic is broadband access. My name is Matthew Kapp, and I serve on the government relations team at Michigan Farm Bureau. Also joining us tonight for the discussion is my colleague on the government relations team, Andrew Vermeesch, and Eric Frederick of Connect Michigan. Our goal of the Hitching Post is to bring MFB staff, industry professionals, and members into your home, farm shop, or tractor each month and allow you to hear what's going on firsthand with policy, commodities, markets, etc. If you have any questions tonight for our panel, feel free to submit those in the Q&A box, and we'll try our best to answer those questions tonight during the conversation. We are recording tonight's Hitching Post, so if you want to go back and rewatch this or share this video or share the video with others, the links will be available by this coming Thursday on both the Michigan Farm Bureau Facebook page and our Michigan Farm Bureau YouTube page. Okay, with that, I'd like to get the discussion started. Eric, Connect Michigan has been no stranger to Michigan Farm Bureau. Michigan Farm Bureau and Connect Michigan have been longtime partners. Can you talk for a little bit about what Connect Michigan does?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Matt. Thank you, Andrew, for having me here. It's always great to talk to Farm Bureau members and staff as well. So Connect Michigan's been around since late 2009, and we are part of Connected Nation. Connected Nation is a national nonprofit organization, and as a nonprofit, our mission is to expand broadband access, adoption, and use to improve quality of life, and whatever that means, whether it's for agriculture, for economic development, for virtual learning, for teleworking, for healthcare. There's literally every sector of our life is impacted by internet access. And so we try to expand that internet access for everyone, and again, to improve that quality of life. So we're a nonprofit in the state. We work with a number of different state agencies and stakeholders at all scales to really try and improve broadband across the board.
American Farm Bureau and Connected Nation have also been longtime partners. Can you talk about that partnership too, Eric?
Yeah, absolutely. Connected Nation as a nonprofit is governed by a board of directors, and Zippy Duvall, the president of the American Farm Bureau, is on our board of directors. And the president before him was on our board of directors at Connected Nation. So obviously broadband is a really big issue for rural America and rural Michigan. So we want to make sure that as an organization, we are represented and governed by those who know rural America best. So having that connection to the American Farm Bureau is critical. And of course, having our working relationship here in Michigan as well with the Farm Bureau is critical, since rural America is where a lot of the broadband work needs to be done.
It's been a long time partnership, and we really appreciate working with you, and we really appreciate the resources that both Connect Michigan and Connected Nation provide. Okay, broadband is a term that's used a lot. Can you talk a little bit about what the term broadband means?
Yeah, it sounds like it's one of those words that is really jargony in the industry, but really broadband just comes down to high-speed internet. That's really all it is. It's an internet connection that's anything except dial-up. If you remember the days of dial-up and the unique sounds your computer used to make when dialing into the internet. And so when we talk about broadband and anything other than dial-up, there's really three different categories of connections we're talking about. So first I'm going to talk about what's called fixed terrestrial broadband. Terrestrial meaning it originates on Earth, so it excludes satellite connections. And those fixed connections are cable, Comcast, Spectrum, DSL, which is Frontier, AT&T, and others, fiber, ACDNet. There's several others in the state. CASAIR are doing fiber in rural parts of the state. Midwest Communications, I'm sorry. And then the other type of fixed broadband is called fixed wireless. And that technology gets a little bit confused with mobile broadband for your smartphone, but they are very different. So fixed wireless is a wireless signal delivered through the air, but it's designed for state permanent use. And we see those types of connections in rural areas quite often because it's a lot more cost effective to put up a tower and broadcast a signal to a rural population where running a wire to every home wouldn't be as cost effective. And we can get into why cost is an issue for broadband here in a little bit if you want. So those are the types of fixed broadband. Those are permanent connections for your home or business or institution. Then we have satellite. There's been a lot of news about satellite broadband lately with Elon Musk and others putting satellites into orbit to blanket the Earth with broadband. Satellite is one of those last resort type options for broadband. I'm sure there's lots of your members that have satellite service because they live in the rural parts of the state and there's nothing else available. But satellite is, if it worked the way that it should or is intended, we wouldn't be talking about broadband because it would be everywhere. So satellite is one of those last resort type options, but it's still there. And then finally, the third category of broadband is mobile broadband. And that is the connection for your smartphone or device that you theoretically could drive from one side of the state to the other and keep that connection constant. Well, we of course know that mobile broadband has its gaps as well. And mobile broadband is different than fixed because they serve two different functions. A lot of people, especially in rural areas, might have access to mobile broadband, but not a cable provider or DSL or fiber. And they'll use their phone or a hotspot as their home broadband connection. And that, again, is one of those last resort options when there isn't a more permanent connection available. But mobile broadband is very important for everyone, just like fixed broadband is. But we don't see mobile broadband as that permanent solution for home connectivity. We want fixed connections everywhere. So in a nutshell, broadband is anything better than dial-up. However, we because we're demanding more and more and more of our internet connections, we typically define broadband by speed. And that's defined by how fast you can download something and how fast you can upload to the internet.
How has high-speed internet changed? I guess what I'm asking is, correct me if I'm wrong, but what you consider high speed today is different than what you would have considered high speed 5 years ago. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. When we first started in Michigan back in late 2009, we published our first map of broadband service in 2010. The definition of broadband was 768 kilobytes per second. This is as technical as I'll get, is 768 kilobytes per second. So a kilobyte is, of course, 1/1000th of a megabit. Now we're measuring broadband at 25 megabits per second download. So orders of magnitude larger than 10 years ago. In the future, we're going to need even faster speeds as, again, we demand more and more of our connections and want to push and not only absorb data and consume data, which can be in the form of cat videos on the internet or Netflix or the telework that you do or healthcare information, but also sending and producing data and pushing it out there. So in 10 years we'll have this conversation where we talk about a gigabit per second or more as being the kind of the benchmark for what we should be looking at for broadband availability. So it's changed rapidly over time, and I think it's only going to continue to change.
Okay, you mentioned cost earlier. What's the issue here? Is the issue access, or is the issue cost, or is the issue a little bit of both?
It's a little bit of both. So if you can think of broadband kind of on a spectrum where, we have to start over here with getting connections to everybody. That's the access or availability piece. And on this side, we have the adoption problem. So these are the folks that have, they might have infrastructure available to them, but they can't afford it. They don't know how to use it. They don't have a device to connect to it. So broadband exists on this spectrum. So a lot of rural areas are going to be on this side where we're talking about simple access to the infrastructure. That's what's lacking. And that happens in rural places because 99% of the time, broadband is a private sector utility. It's delivered by the private sector. And if the private sector can't make money building out into an area because it's rural, there's not as many customers per the infrastructure they're putting in, it makes it very difficult for them to expand into those rural areas. And that would be true of a public entity as well. Let's say a municipality wanted to do it. They're still going to run into the same economics. So when we're talking about problems with expanding infrastructure, household density is the number one barrier to that infrastructure getting out there. If the private sector could make a business case for expanding into the areas that are currently unserved, they would have done it by now because there's a business case there. They want to expand and make money, but if there's not enough households, they can't make that happen. So that's where we start running the edge of, is it financially feasible to build out? And we're seeing the federal government and now the state government stepping in to modify those economics by providing subsidies to those companies and encouraging them to build out into these rural areas because they know that those providers couldn't do it on their own. So when it comes to cost, there's two of those things. One is the cost of actually building out service, which is the affordability of those connections once they're there can be very troublesome for residents no matter where you live. We typically think of the affordability issue being an urban problem, but it's not. The affordability challenge goes across demographics, it goes across geography. The affordability of those connections is something a lot of people struggle with. We estimate that about 22% of households in Michigan that don't have an internet connection don't have it because it's not affordable. And so that can be a challenge for a lot of folks. So even though the connections are there, that connection might be out of reach because of the monthly cost of service.
Hey, Eric, when I speak to farmers across the state, I hear a lot of them complain about caps. They have access to internet, and they pay for it, but their provider tells them that they are capped at so much data and that nothing they can do to kind of increase that or get unlimited access. Can you speak a little bit? How does that kind of go into the affordability versus accessibility?
That's right. So that I would say that's more on the affordability side because, well, it does impact access, but it's mostly affordability. So there's really no regulation about data caps that can be put on internet connections. That's up to the provider to make that decision. And it usually is because they don't have, or they have to pay for all of the data that they push out of their network or down to their network. Data caps on there to try and limit that. And that's why those caps are in place. But if there's a farmer or really anyone else who has to keep paying for more and more data each month, you might be paying a relatively low monthly cost of service, but you have to pay $10 for every 50 more gigabytes, of data that you want to download. And that just compounds the affordability issue. I know satellite connections are kind of known for having aggressive data caps. There's some that do have data caps. Even wired options like DSL and cable can have data caps as well. So it mostly stems from that internet service provider trying to control their costs of data that they have to pay to other internet carriers to carry their traffic. And that's why the end user ends up having to pay for data caps. And again, the cost of broadband, data caps, none of that is regulated. So there's not, it's all left to market forces to determine the cost of service and if data caps are part of that when it comes to the availability and affordability of internet service.
Good, Kai. I know that's a question we get a lot. and we kind of gave a brief overview of kind of the challenges that we see. The conversation of broadband has been going on for quite some time, and there's been a lot of talk both at the federal level, the state level, and local levels. Can you explain some of the investments and some of the things that have been done or are being done in terms of expanding broadband? And then, if you don't mind, follow up, where do you see broadband, this conversation, in 5 years, 10 years? Are we gaining any ground, or are we moving the needle? Or are we kind of stagnant?
It's kind of all of the above. And I hate to say that, but when we talked earlier about the definition of broadband changing, that moving target is what keeps the digital divide open. And so if we were to look at a map of broadband service in Michigan now at the definition of broadband from 2010, mission accomplished. We solved the problem. But because we keep demanding more, so if here's the definition of broadband, my hands are going to be shaky in this video, aren't they? We get everybody up to the certain speed, and then the definition changes. So now we have to move everybody up to that same speed again, and then the definition changes, and we have to. So we're constantly creating a digital divide by redefining broadband. Now, I'm not saying we should stop defining, and increasing the demand for broadband service, because we need to keep demanding more of our networks and having more robust connectivity. But it does deepen the divide when we're pushing for one metric and trying to bring everybody up to that speed again, just for that metric to change again. So we have made ground. I think I don't have my numbers right in front of me, but I'll do my best. Back in 2018, we released a map for the state in partnership with the Michigan Public Service Commission. And on that map, we calculated about 8 to 9% of households in Michigan had access to a broadband connection of 1 gigabit per second or faster. So 8 to 9% of households, mostly concentrated in urban areas where there's a lot of people living. And then we just released a new map of broadband 2 weeks ago for the state of Michigan. So a 2-year difference. And now about 32% of households in the state have access to a 1 gigabit per second connection. So in 2 years, we went from 8 to 9% to 32%. And while I know that those connections are concentrated where there's a lot of, the population density is higher, it still shows that we're making progress. And if you look at our map at connectmi.org, there's a map of just 1 gigabit per second service. There's a lot of rural areas that are starting to get covered. And the reason that is because we have some really aggressive and forward-thinking rural electric cooperatives who are doing broadband service. Midwest Energy, through their subsidiary Midwest Communications, has been building out fiber in Southwest Michigan. Tri-County Homeworks in Ionia, Montcalm, a little bit of Eaton County. They've been building out fiber in rural areas. So we're going to start seeing almost this leapfrogging. If this pattern continues, we're going to see some leapfrogging where rural areas start to pass urban areas in the speed availability. Now, we don't have rural electric cooperatives that cover all of rural Michigan, but those that do, we're going to see some big increases, I think, in the very near future. I think this is a conversation that we're going to continue having 5, 10, 15 years down the line, because we keep moving that benchmark. And again, it's not a punitive reason to move that benchmark. It's just that we need to demand more and more of our networks so that we can continue to advance and take advantage of all the benefits that broadband brings us. Again, telehealth, teleworking, virtual learning, all of those things that have really been brought to the forefront during the COVID pandemic. So I think looking into the future, like I said, we're going to be talking about gigabit per second networks even more, and see that as an aspirational goal for the state over the next 5 to 10 years.
Good. I want to back up just a minute, because this kind of spurred another question. Early on, you talked about the investments in broadband being privately driven, privately invested in, the funds for companies that have to invest and have to make a business model. What's the role in government? And obviously, we don't want government to be a provider and compete in the private world, but that doesn't necessarily mean that government doesn't have a role in the expanding broadband. Can you tap into a little bit of what government's role is in helping get access across the state?
Yeah, and I think there's two roles. And the first, what we've seen over the last 6 years or so, and then what we're probably in the next 4. So we're kind of in the middle of this decade of government. I'll call it intervention, but that's not the right word. It's where the government has seen a market failure to expand broadband, and they're subsidizing that build out. Again, the private sector has shown that they just can't make a case for expanding more into rural areas because the density of customers is just simply not there. So I think the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, sees that, and it's a market failure. And so they come in and help subsidize those expansions. So it's private capital and public capital coming together to solve that problem. So I think that's one of the roles of government is where the private sector can't make a case because of existing, and spatial issues on the ground that are very slow to change. They can come in and help offset that and make the finances work to expand into those rural areas. The second, I think, is in partnership. So it's similar, but I think when I say partnership for broadband, I'm thinking more of at a local or maybe even a regional level. We've seen a lot of places in the state where, again, the private sector can't expand. It doesn't make financial sense. It wouldn't make financial sense for the public to do it because they would run into the same economics. So how can they work together? And I think that's really the key for connecting a lot of rural Michigan, is having the public and private entities sit down and talk together about what they each bring to the table and how they can solve the challenge together. That's the absolute key, I think, for solving local broadband challenges, is making sure that community stakeholders are empowered with the information about broadband so they know what it is, they can talk about it. They don't have to be technical engineers with it, but enough to be able to understand the private sector side of it, and then to really come up with a partnership for expansion. That's where we've seen a lot of success. So I think where there's a major market failure, and it's evidenced by the FCC's big subsidies that they've been giving out. Michigan benefited from $500 million over the last 6 years in broadband subsidies coming to the state. At the end of October, there's another FCC auction coming up, and about 250,000 households in Michigan, 250,000 households and businesses, I should say, are eligible to be part of an auction at the FCC. So internet service providers bid in a reverse auction format to serve these eligible areas of the state. That's going to make a big impact. So that's where that FCC sees that market failure and steps in and helps offset those at the local level where we can find partnerships. I think that's the role the public sector can help play in broadband expansion.
I look at this issue, and when we talk to our farmers, oftentimes they explain like broadband used to be a luxury. When you had the dial-up, you mentioned dial-up, it was something that you had, but now it's a necessity. You need it for their business. They need it to access data. They need it for market, and they need it to make better informed decisions. I think that's reflected in our policy. We talk about the need for a comprehensive solution to expand broadband, both in accessibility and affordability. You mentioned the rural co-ops. We have real strong policy in encouraging the co-ops to do the expansion they've been doing. I know a lot of our members have received the benefit of that, and they're looking forward to those changes. We also talk about the public-private partnerships that are created at the local level and continue to we see fruition on the build out. From a member perspective, what if an individual is having challenges getting broadband, no one's available, where can they go to see what they have available to them? Where to start with? Is there any resources they can go to get some more information?
Yeah, I think the best sources to pat ourselves in the back a little bit is the Connect Michigan website, connectmi.org. And we have just recently overhauled that website to add a lot more resources directly for residents, for businesses, for communities that are looking at this issue. And we have a map on there where you can type in your address and it'll tell you what internet service providers could possibly serve your location. if that doesn't work, or if you find something that is inaccurate, we definitely want to hear from you to make sure that we can help track you down. We might have some more local information that we can help track down a provider for you, or find a nearby one that might be able to reach your home. And of course, we want to hear where the map is wrong, because again, making a map of broadband service is not an exact science. As much as we would love it to be, it's not an exact science. So hearing from the public about where the map is wrong is definitely very helpful for us, so we can change it and make it better. But definitely start at the website, connectmi.org. We have lots of resources on there, including affordability resources that folks might not be aware of. Even basic definitions of broadband, and to help folks for this topic. And again, check out the map on there. Check out the resources on there. I think there's a lot on there for folks to learn from.
The map is really cool. I've personally used the map. I've typed in my address, and I give Connect Michigan a lot of credit, because that's a really easy resource to use to find out what options you have where you live. So I would really encourage anybody viewing this to check out their website, and as he said, you can type in your address and find out what services are available to you. We do have one question that came in the chat. Is there any legislation out there, either at a federal or state level, that we should be aware of on broadband?
Yeah, so there's a lot going on. Back in 2018, so late 2018, tapped a grant program called the Connecting Communities Grant Program, so CMIC for short. And that program was a $20 million program. Last week, the governor announced, I believe it was almost $13 million in funds to internet service providers that are going to connect 15,000 households because of that grant program. There's going to be a kind of a second round of grantees from that initial $20 million that are going to be announced here pretty soon. And the governor mentioned that as well. And then the legislature added another $14 million to that grant program. So we'll have another round of broadband grants going out. While the amount of money, that 20 million and 14 million sounds like a lot, but in terms of broadband infrastructure construction, it's not a whole lot. I mean, the FCC is spending $16 billion on October 29th for broadband across the country. So it's a relatively small amount of money. But what we've seen is that broadband providers have been able to access those state funds to really push out into areas that either weren't eligible for federal funds or just kind of fell through the cracks of service, if you will. And so they've really been able to expand pretty efficiently with the relatively small amounts of dollars through that CMIC state program. So I'm really excited for the second round of that. That's coming up pretty soon, because I think there's going to be a lot of providers interested in that. The other thing that's going on right now that was part of the grant announcement last week is that we've created a new state broadband task force. I mean, Connected Nation Michigan and Michigan Economic Development Corporation, along with 12 other state agencies. And while it might sound like, oh, it's just another task force, it's just another talking group, I would say that this is more of a working group. So back in 2018, the Michigan Broadband Roadmap was published that had just a myriad of recommendations for improving broadband across the state. But we had an administration change, and so there wasn't a lot that was moved on except for the grant program. And now this group is going to be tasked with moving a lot of those recommendations forward. So I think we're going to see a lot of movement in broadband in Michigan in the very near future. COVID has brought broadband to the forefront of everyone's minds as we're all teleworking and virtual learning and accessing telehealth. So we're going to see a lot of movement in broadband here at the state level very quickly. And at the federal level, like I said, the FCC is going to be spending $16 billion at the end of October to build out broadband across the country. And 250,000 households and businesses in Michigan are eligible for that fund. So there's a lot going on. And I know that in any future recovery type legislation that might go through at a federal level, there's likely going to be something for broadband there too. So I would say watch the news for a lot more on broadband going out of Michigan in the near future.
Good, good. You have a field staff. Eric, can you talk a little bit about what services your field staff provide and how they can help local communities that lack broadband?
Sure. You can contact all of us through our website, but my two field staff, one deals with kind of northern Lower Peninsula and the upper peninsula, and then the other one deals with the lower half of the Lower Peninsula. And their goal is to really provide technical assistance to communities and local stakeholders. I mean, they get phone calls all the time, asking questions about this and that provider and this technology, and we really want them to be there to do just that. We can help facilitate local broadband meetings. If there's a county that wants to, get together and talk about broadband, 9 and 10 News up in Traverse City, a story about Benzie County the other day and Sheboygan County today. Benzie County yesterday, Sheboygan County today, getting involved in broadband. And my staff are part of all those discussions. So, for all the communities in the state and anybody who's interested in talking about broadband or has a question. And again, on the website, connectmi.org, there's one contact email, but it goes to all of us. So we can put you in touch with the right person that way.
And they're available to speak at County Farm Bureau or District Farm Bureau meetings, correct?
Yep, absolutely. Those are the kind of meetings that we love to have. And spread that, spread the information about broadband far and wide to help everybody better understand it.
Okay. I think that about wraps up all the questions that we had. Andrew or Eric, do you have any closing comments that you want to make as we wrap up?
I'll start. I want to, for one, thank Eric for joining us today. Me and him have served and worked together on a variety of issues over the years, served on a couple of work groups together. I want to thank them for their efforts and their partnership in this. I know from a member standpoint, this is a very important issue that we often hear, and any way we can work together in the future to help accomplish expanding broadband. Looking forward to it. So thank you.
Eric?
Yeah, and again, I would echo that as well. Thanks for having me on. I did see that a question just came through in the panel asking if other states have similar programs like Michigan. And I would say yes, but, and the but is that every state is a little bit different in how they handle broadband. Some of them work through nonprofits like Connect Michigan. Others have broadband offices. Some states don't do anything with broadband. But I'd say the most common thing we have with other states is the grant program. Many states have grants, and we were a little late to the game by 2018, but we finally got it. And so we're working on that now. But we're going to be getting pretty aggressive with broadband at the state level here in the near future, and surpassing some of our other states like Ohio. So anyway, thank you again for having me. Broadband is an important topic, and it's something that's critical to every aspect of our lives. Especially now as we're virtual learning and teleworking and accessing our healthcare providers via your smartphone or your laptop. So more than happy to talk about this topic with anyone who's interested. So please contact us.
Okay. Well, I want to thank Eric and Andrew for joining us for MFB's October Hitching Post. Remember, a video of tonight's event will be on our Facebook page by Thursday, so feel free to share the video with your networks. And while you're on the MFB Facebook page, you can also check out the previous Hitching Post sessions. And one final last note I need to make: we would love your feedback on this Hitching Post discussion and series. Before you leave the meeting, if you could fill out the quick survey, and then you'll be directed to our public policy website, which is a great place to check out news regarding policy and politics impacting agriculture. And you can also view the Michigan Farm Bureau and American Farm Bureau Federation policy books and links to your county farm bureau to connect on these issues locally. Thanks again, Eric and Andrew. I think it was a great discussion.